Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here today, and as Marlon said, I am actually from this area. I grew up in Greenville, Texas, about 75 miles from here, and I attended Greenville elementary school, high school, graduated, and went on to East Texas State, which of course they call something different now, but it'll always be East Texas to me. And basically, I'm really pleased to be here because also it allows me to talk about the Assessment Leadership Institute. By the way, whenever we got the original invitation to send somebody, I convinced them that I was the best choice because I told them I spoke fluent Texan. And they bought that, so I was real pleased that that worked out for me. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to be back home in Northeast Texas. I'm going to start out my talk, and let me see if I can figure out how to use this. There we go. I'm going to start out my talk by giving you some information about my university, about the area, about the situation we faced before we started the Assessment Leadership Institute. So basically giving you a lead-in to the motivation for it. Following that, I'm going to talk about some of the characteristics of the Assessment Leadership Institute because I know that you're setting one up, so I'm going to try to give you some of the main details. Then I'm going to show you some of the results that we got because we did treat it as a research project. And then finally, I'm going to give you what I hope are some useful takeaways because there's no particular reason for you to make all the mistakes that we did. I'd sort of like to help avoid that for you. Into the mic, okay. Now can you hear me? I feel like I'm selling telephones. Okay, basically, University of Northern Colorado, as Marlon said, it's about 60 miles north of Denver. It's about 65 miles from the mountains. It's a really good location. We can get to the mountains in less than an hour, but we don't get the really severe weather because we're out on the plains, so it's really good in that respect. Incidental fact about the city, it's named Greeley after Horace Greeley. And he was invited at the time they changed the name to come for the name changing. He decided not to, so I think it's kind of ironic that the fellow that told everybody to go west decided he didn't really want to himself. We are a four-year graduate and undergraduate institution. We have over 200 programs. At the moment, we've got, I believe it says 113 undergraduate, 103 graduate. We're fairly active in this, so it's a moving target. We have pretty similar characteristics to some of your areas. I mean, not exactly, but pretty similar in that we have about a quarter of our students identify as ethnic minorities. We have about a third of our students first generation. We have, as I mentioned, about 12,000 students. So from Colorado standpoint, that's kind of a mid-sized college. And we have more females than males, about 62 to 38%. So we've got a fairly consistent, common setup that you probably recognize, at least on some of your campuses. Now, it turns out, though, we also had some common problems. We discovered in 2007 that we had a problem. The university was spending an awful lot of time and effort to collect assessment data, and it was mainly to satisfy our accrediting body. We didn't admit it that way, but that's the way it really worked out. And it turns out not only were we collecting all this data, but we weren't really using it in the most productive way. We were using it mainly for accountability, not for improvement. Now, in case you're not really clear on the difference between those two, see if some of these characteristics don't ring a bell to you. On the accountability side, collecting data for that, you're going to present yourself in the best light. You want to make yourself look good. Whereas on the improvement side, you actually candidly discuss the strengths and weaknesses in an attempt to make yourself better. Accountability. Data is used to generate reports. Usually these reports are put in a nice notebook and put on somebody's bookcase. Perhaps they're looked at, maybe not. Generally they are generated, though, for external audience. They're not really for internal. From an improvement standpoint, the data is used to help make decisions. Accountability. Very heavy emphasis on quantifiable data, so we can do statistics, so we can prove we're better. Whereas on the improvement side, we do use quantifiable data, but also qualifiable data. Qualitative data, excuse me. It's better in some respects to help you do improvements. Now here's an important one. In the accountability side, there was very limited faculty engagement. Basically, people did as little as possible if they could help it, whereas on the improvement side, it should be faculty-driven. And the reason I have that emphasized is because that's basically what we are running into, a fairly large problem. And finally, the last one, the accountability is intended to normally satisfy some external party. Realistically, you're doing the assessment so that somebody will leave you alone or you'll get some kind of an accreditation, which of course is not a great motivation, whereas on the improvement side, you're actually trying to improve yourself. And on this last one, I did a thought experiment with my college. I'm in the College of Business, and I asked the people in the room, I said, if tomorrow our accrediting body said you no longer need to do assessment, everything's fine, everything's great, how many of you would keep doing it? And there's a few people that sort of raised their hand a little just to see if anybody was watching. Basically, though, nobody in the room wanted to keep doing it. It was something somebody made them do. So that kind of makes my point. Now, given that the change was, or rather given that we realized we had a problem, we decided we needed to make some change. And I say we, this was upper administration. And it turns out that there is actually a change model out there by Bowman and Deal that breaks down the organization into 4 frames, and the notion is that you can't really implement organizational change unless you address all 4 of the frames, and those frames of course are structural, human resource, symbolic, and political. Now the model itself isn't really geared for assessment, so the little text in these quadrants is changing it and is casting it into a mode that would work with assessment. The point is, though, you want to address all of them, because if you don't, you're not going to get permanent, long-lasting change. Now, our original plan was to attack all 4 of them. However, it turns out that that was a little bit too much to start with, so we decided we would just go with the human resource and the political. Later, we pulled in the structural and the symbolic with the aid of upper administration. The point is that you can't ignore any of these factors, or the chances are you won't have as good a success as you want. Now, knowing that we had change, we needed to build infrastructure. And the infrastructure started in 2007, and that was whenever the university decided to hire a dedicated director of assessment, and also she had an administrative assistant. She was new to the university, very qualified, new to the university, worked directly for the provost, so she had a lot of authority in that respect. And she had a fairly broad mission. If you can see on the slide here, she was supposed to establish vision, develop policies, lead strategic planning, advocate student learning. Really massive vision, or really massive mission, rather, I should say. She was outnumbered by the faculty. So basically, the notion was one person can't do this, so we need to get more people involved. So an assessment council was created. And this is actually where I came on the scene. I've been struggling whether to say we and they and it. I can actually say we from here on out because I was part of the assessment council. Now the notion behind this was one person in a central administrative office cannot create culture change throughout an organization. It's too big of a job. So we had lots of people, meaning 1 or 2 from each academic unit if possible, the large units, and their job was to represent the assessment director in their area and bring back information from the various programs. This worked pretty well, but it turned out that it wasn't as effective as we wanted because this was another committee. And those of you that have served on committees know how it works. You have your monthly or every other week meeting, you show up on time, you take notes, you get your task, you go back, and then you promptly get back to your standard job. We weren't really making the change we needed to because it was just yet another task. So the assessment committee decided that we needed some people that were focused specifically on assessment. And that's when we decided that we would create the faculty fellows. And as it turns out, quite a few of the people on the assessment committee became fellows, so it wasn't like it was a separate group. Now, the faculty fellows were intended to be embedded ambassadors of assessment. They were advocates within their units. And I'll give more information in a minute, but basically there was 1 per college, and each of their job was, as far as the assessment fellows go, was to represent the college in making the change permanent. Because what we wanted to do was to get as many people involved as possible. Just having a few committee members that after the meeting went back and basically went on with their business wasn't good enough. This was supposed to be a distinct part of their job. Now, as far as the fellows go, here's some of the characteristics of them. And I'm pleased to hear that you're going to be starting fellows too, and it sounds like you're going to be doing it in a similar manner. I think that will be successful for you. First off, one fellow from each college. We have 6 colleges, so there's one from each. All of us were, I say all, most of us were full-time faculty. There was one person, Julie Sexton, who Marlon referred to in another presentation. She doesn't have a teaching assignment. She's a full-time researcher. The rest of us, though, were full-time teachers. There were no administrators in the group. And that's actually a good thing, because as full-time standard teachers, we understood the pressures that all the other teachers dealt with. We knew about preparing lectures, about dealing with students, about grading papers, about having deadlines, about having service and research responsibilities. So to a certain extent, we were on the same mental level, if you will, with the rest of the department. So it gave us more credibility with them, as opposed to just having somebody show up and tell you to do things different and then go away. Initially, it was a 3-year commitment. That was important because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a rotating group of people. A very important component to make this work is to make sure that the group gels, that they actually work together long enough to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, so that whenever it comes to doing different tasks, they know who to point to. If the group changes on a rapid basis, you never really get that kind of cooperation. Now, as an incentive, each fellow was either given a course release per semester or the equivalent. And that had dual purpose. For one, obviously, it helped us have enough time to do the work, because this was significantly more work than a standard committee assignment. And also, it made everybody, including us, aware of the importance of it, because our standard teaching load is 3 sections per semester. So to get 1 class removed, that's a 1/3 down. So that's fairly important. The team, as I mentioned, spent about a year gelling. That's the word I use. And I don't really expect that you will do that, to be honest. One of the points I wanted to make about this whole presentation, and the reason I went through the history of it, is to get across the point that this was an organic thing. We didn't start out on day one with the ALI and the fellows and all this stuff in mind. We were just going along, reacting to the situation. At this point in time, right after the fellows were developed, we didn't know we were going to do the ALI. We were just doing the task we were assigned. So we did standard fellows things. It turns out, though, that was a good thing, because there was an entire year that we spent working together. We went to a conference together. We would have presentations. And as I mentioned a second ago, we got to know each other's strengths and weaknesses and how we could work with each other better. That wouldn't have happened if we just all shown up on day one. Now, the team met regularly. That was an important thing. It wasn't a sporadic. And each fellow was responsible for the assessment within their college, meaning that we had to make it work. So there's that extra weight on top of it. As far as the actual task that the fellows do, mentor, teach, and research. Now, under the mentor category, basically we were within our colleges responsible for making sure that the information was available. And different ones of us came up with different ways to do that. Some of us had the little lunch and learns, you know, we had little box lunches, and if you have food, people will come. Others, we had open door policy. If you had questions about assessment, occasionally we'd go to people's offices. Point is, we wanted to make ourselves available. As far as the teach goes, before the ALI, we were actually working on some workshops, and we did them the traditional faculty development way, to where we would have, it's called CEDL in our college, Center for Educational Learning and Teaching, and we would have a presentation, and then we just sort of hope people showed up. You know, if you do it, they will come, that sort of thing. Not amazingly successful, to be honest, but we did it that way. Also, later on, the ALI workshops. And finally, research. We, as being all faculty members or people heavily involved in research, wanted to be able to actually use the experience to perhaps get some publications. So we treated the whole thing as a big research project, and we collected data all along the way, which we are still analyzing, by the way. Now, as far as what we did, and again, this is before the ALI existed. Sorry about the hopping around so much, but I'm trying to give you the full background. One of the first things the fellows did is what we called a listening tour. And this isn't a particularly new idea, but it was fairly new within our environment. And the goal was to take the pulse of the university, specifically concerning assessment. And 2 primary goals. One, introduce ourselves. So in my college, the College of Business, introduced, hi, I'm your new fellow, that sort of thing. And here's my job, I'm here to help you. Sounds like I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, but different. Anyway, we wanted them to know that this was a new task that we had, and we wanted to query them, survey them, if you will, about their attitudes, knowledges, and abilities about assessment, because we really had no idea who knew what. For all we knew, everybody was great at it. Turns out they weren't. The outcome of the listening tour had three not surprising results, but still illuminating. First off, the faculty felt unprepared. And basically by what I mean is everybody's a specialist in their discipline. They're really good in that. Nobody has a discipline of assessment, at least not in our group. So nobody really felt it was something they were good at, which kind of makes sense actually. The faculty felt they didn't have any time for assessment. This also was very telling, because if I had said, do you have time to teach classes? They'd all say, well, yeah. Do you have time to grade papers and assign grades? Well, yeah, that's part of my job. How about assessment? Oh, no time for that. That's not part of my job. That's the problem, that nobody considered it part of their job. That's the culture change that we needed to incorporate into the university. Finally, and again, this is another important one, a lot of faculty were kind of afraid of assessment because it had been an assessment for accountability for so long. They were afraid that if we collect data to see how much students learn, and you're going to do some kind of accountability, that sort of implies maybe they're going to hold me accountable if the students in my class didn't learn, right? I mean, can you kind of see that logic thought? Now, that's not the way it is, but from their standpoint, if you're going to say a student didn't learn and they were in your class, why didn't they learn? It sort of is threatening. So that was something we had to get over really quick, because that's kind of the death knell of assessment if people think you're going to use it against them. The Assessment Leadership Institute, finally, we get to the reason you're here. This came about after the listening tour, and realistically we had been thinking about something similar to this, but it turns out a vehicle to incorporate it came our way. We are not under SACS, we are under the HLC, which is Higher Learning Commission. It's a similar accrediting body, and they have something called the HLC Assessment Academy. And what happens, the way that works is if you have a project, you write up a project proposal, you submit it to them, and if they think it's good enough, they will allow you to be in the academy. And by being in the academy, you get to go to their academy headquarters in Chicago, which was really neat. And you get to participate in their research, and you get mentored by them, and it gives you relatively high visibility. And since this is our accrediting body, having high visibility was kind of a big deal. So we created a proposal, and the proposal included multiple parts, three of which were the Assessment Leadership Institute, assessment mini-grants, and an assessment fair, an annual assessment fair. And the idea behind this was we wanted to try to get as many people on campus involved in assessment things as possible. The ALI was a key part, but these others were also important parts, because what we're going for is a critical mass of faculty on campus so that the normal culture will change. We also made sure that new faculty initiations or orientations included a section on assessment, so they didn't think they didn't have this attitude that this is an extra thing. They just started out saying, yeah, I assess. You know, why wouldn't you? So basically, we made the proposal was accepted, we went to the Chicago event, and it's a 4-year project, by the way. The first year you go and you work with the mentors, and then you go away for 3 years and implement it with yearly reports back to the mothership, and then at the end of 4 years you show back up in Chicago and you get to present your results, and at that time you're a mentor to the earlier groups. So it's an interesting approach. Anyway, though, the 4 days at Chicago, we worked around the clock, it seemed, to make our plan very crisp and formal. Then we went back and started to implement it. Now, here's some of the key points of the plan. And this slide and the next slide are a little bit redundant, but that's because I want to make sure you get the information, because, again, I think this is a decent takeaway for you. First off, funded and supported by the provost. The funded part, obviously that's a big deal. I mean, you have to fund these. But an also big deal has to do with support. It's one thing to just have a check show up. It's quite another if the provost at pretty much every event says, oh, by the way, you need to be worrying about assessment, and the Assessment Leadership Institute's the way to do it. We had very vocal support from the provost, which helped an awful lot. Second, faculty developed and led. We didn't have external consultants come in. We did all the workshops ourselves. Remember that gelling process? This is where that came in handy. And I know I shouldn't talk about external people coming in because it's kind of me. But at the same time, within your colleges, it will work better, I think, if you have the local people tailor it to work with you, with your area, because some things from us might not work that well for you. It was a cohort and teamed-based structure, a train-the-trainer model. And the idea behind that was that we didn't want to have that seedal workshop to where we just sort of hope people came, and we didn't want to go to the individual departments because we couldn't hit enough of them to make a dent. So what we did was we selected a group of participants, usually 7 to 9, and each group was from a different program, and they would select 2 to 4 representatives who would be the permanent representatives for the whole project. It was a 2-year commitment on their part, and they weren't supposed to be changing representatives because that destroys the whole context of it. And basically, there was also a financial incentive for the participants. In our case, we gave each participating department $2,500, the intent being to use it for assessment-oriented things. Of course, we were smart about this. We gave them half up front and half after the project. We didn't want to have that sort of a problem. And also, the projects were dovetailed together. They were actually a design curriculum, and I'm very pleased that you guys are going to at least start with our curriculum, because we put a lot of effort into making sure that the homework at the end of one session is what you start talking about at the next session. And then later in the workshop series, we referred back to examples that if you'd been going to all the others would make sense. And it was also rigorous. It was not intended for those people who happened to have been chosen as participants to have to do all the work. They were supposed to go back to their home departments, get the rest of the department to work with it. A couple of advantages of this. One, it showed the home department that these were actually the local experts, and also it got more people on board with the notion of assessment, thus the trainer model. And finally, we, as I said, we're faculty members. We want to get papers as much as anybody, so we treated it as a research project. This pretty much says the same thing as the last slide. It's in a little more condensed format, so in case you wanted to lift it and do something with it internally. 2 points on it, though, that I think are important to mention. First off, at each workshop, we made sure we mentioned at least one time that the assessment was for improvement, not accountability. We were really worried about that problem that I mentioned before about people thinking we were going to somehow come back and hurt them professionally. Second thing is, initially we said teams should have 2 or more people. Actually, 2 is a little low. If you have 2 people and over the course of the year the scheduling problems occur, one of them can't come, well then you've got one person at a table, and that's not much of a team, right? So 3 or 4 is actually better, because then if 1 or 2 people can't make it, you still have a working team in place. Now here's the activities, and again, I think that you're using a lot of these, which from my standpoint is really good, because then I can talk about it more directly. We had 7 workshops. Each workshop led you a little further into the notion of building an assessment plan. As I mentioned, the workshops were dovetailed together, so they worked from one to the next. At the end of the 7 workshops, the goal was to have a working assessment plan for the program. Now, each of these workshops was 2 hours. We did them once a month. It was in the same location, we had food there, which helps, that sort of thing. And it was very consistent, I guess is what I'm getting at. So people didn't have to move all over campus to try to figure out where it was being held. And also, we had a mix of lecture and teamwork. So we talked for a while, and then they'd work for a while, then we talked back and forth. So it was a fairly traditionally structured workshop, to be honest. After the first year, the same participants went on to year 2, and during year 2 what they were supposed to do is revise their assessment plan to make it better. Also, they were supposed to come up with an assessment project, and at the end of the second year they were required, if they wanted the second half of the money, to present that project at the annual assessment fair. Now, while year 2 was going on for the first cohort, year 1 was going on for the second cohort, so these things overlapped. I know I've been throwing a bunch of random facts out there, so the point of this slide is to help you put everything into a timeline. Basically, 2011, 2012, that's whenever we did the listening tour. That's whenever we submitted our HLC project. 2012 through 2015 is whenever we did the 3 cohorts. Now, the third cohort started in 14-15. It didn't finish until 15-16. So we have all the data for the first two finished. The third one we're still working on. 15-16, we finished it up and we presented our plan to the HLC Academy. And at the moment, we're working on some new stuff, which I'll tell you in a minute. Leave you in suspense for a minute now, though. So that's the structure, the skeletal structure, if you will, of the ALI. What did it do for us? Was it worth doing? Well, here's what I'm going to talk about here. We're going to talk about how the skills changed. I'm going to talk about how the attitudes changed, and I'm going to talk about how the knowledge changed of the participants. First off, the skills. 81% reported they gained skills leading to assessment activity, in leading assessment activities, excuse me. Just a bit of information too, by the way, I keep forgetting what you don't know. Before each workshop, or before the cohort started, we did a survey, a big survey. What do you know about assessment? After the workshops, we did another survey. It's the same survey. What do you know about assessment? That's our pre and post data. After each individual workshop, we also did a how did we do 1-minute evaluation. You know, what would you do different? How would we improve it, etc. Also, the fellows, after each presentation, we got together and everybody critiqued the person who gave the presentation. So if it was my presentation, I got to sit there and listen to people say, well, you spoke too fast and you waved your arms too much, whatever, all those good things. So it was a very data-intensive process. That's why we have this data, is because we collected along the way. Anyway, getting back to this, 81% reported they gained skills in leading assessment activities. These are the participants, and that's because they had to go back to their departments and work with their department group. 59% reported that the programs rather improved how their program assessed student learning. I think that's a little low as to what actually happened, because at the time we took this survey, they hadn't really had enough time to put their plan into play. But even giving that, 59% still said they felt that they were doing a better job assessing. And of the 25 programs, participant programs that went through, 21 submitted post-assessment plans, 4 didn't, and all 21 of those had improved assessment plans. And this graphically shows that. Basically, the blue lines are the pre-test, the gold lines are the post-test, and this is a rubric that we developed with the maximum score of, I believe, 84. So basically, some of these along the top, in the middle especially, are almost at the top level they could possibly be. And again, these are looking at the assessment plans they had initially and had after the fact. You notice the two on the right, those programs didn't even have assessment plans, so theirs improved infinitely, right? 4 of them, by the way, and again, I wanted to show the good and the bad side. 4 groups didn't finish, so there's 4 nothings out there, but that's a relatively low percentage. Second, attitudes. How did attitudes change? 76% of the participants report a more positive attitude and less concern about assessment. That last point's a big deal, because remember, we were concerned up front that they were going to think of this as a way to get them in trouble professionally. That basically went away. Finally, 97% reported increased confidence in how to conduct assessment. That was another problem initially in the listening tour. People said they really didn't understand assessment and had no idea how to start with it. Well, after the fact, 97% reported that they didn't have that problem. Once again, a nice colorful chart in case you like that sort of thing. The asterisk indicates statistically significant. The gold is the blue is pre-test, the gold is post-test. And just so you can understand how to interpret this, the bar groups to the right, those were subcomponents of the bar on the left. So the 3 on the right, faculty attitude about assessment in general, attitudes about programs assessment, and faculty concern about assessment, those are all sub-questions of the how do you feel about it, which is the bar on the left. Later on, probably there would be a question, so I'll answer it now. How come the faculty concern went up so much? It was reverse coded. So basically, it didn't go up so much as reverse coded, so it actually went down significantly. Finally, how did knowledge change? That was the third area we were pushing for. 97% reported an increase of the understanding of assessment between the pre and the post-test. Now, the pre-test and the post-test both ask a question. Can you give us the, I'm trying to think of the exact wording, what are the characteristics of a good assessment plan? Something to that effect. And they were supposed to, in text, give the characteristics. In the pretest, about 48% described what we considered relevant characteristics, which of course means 52 didn't. And on the post-test, 64% described relevant characteristics. Now, whenever we saw that, we were a bit irritated. So just 64%? Have an explanation for that. The way this question was laid out is, again, it was a free-form question. So we took the text, and if they said basically, I don't know, that's kind of a lazy way out. That's the stuff on the right, or the left, rather. They just didn't know. If they gave characteristics that weren't relevant, that's the next category, moving left to right. However, those two are relatively minimal. The not relevant and relevant, that's a blended category. In other words, they had this paragraph, and there are some characteristics that were good, but there are some things like quick and cheap and things like that that really weren't relevant, so it was half and half, or a blended. Finally, off to the far right, that's the money one. That's the one you want, where people actually described the good characteristics of a good assessment plan. Now, the reason I think that the numbers were relatively low, we didn't realize until after we'd finished doing this that we never actually gave them a list of the characteristics that make up a good assessment plan. It wasn't like we ever had a slide that said, here it is. So basically, this makes it more impressive. They synthesized this on their own just from hearing the workshops. So the fact that it went up at all, to a certain extent, is kind of amazing, because we never told them. And also, the third from the left, the fact that the non-relevance went down, also that's fairly impressive, because we never told them what wasn't relevant. Were we to do it again, obviously we would have that slide in the presentations, but that kind of explains that one, I think. So those are those three areas. Now, how did it impact? This is a slightly different way of looking at how it worked within the university. First off, we're going to talk about impact on leadership, and this includes the leadership of the faculty fellows and also the team participants mixed together. Basically improved knowledge and skills. Everybody involved got improved knowledge and skills about assessment. Turns out that 4 of the 6 fellows got promotions. 2 of us became associate deans, a couple got promoted in rank and had better positions. Now, I can't claim that that's why. It doesn't hurt though, right? High visibility, provost knows you by your first name, that sort of thing. As far as the participants go, many of the participants went on to serve in leadership positions within the various high-level committees on campus, which is nice, it's laudable. And finally, some of the ALI participants are currently engaged in a state effort that we've got going on in Colorado to revise the general education transfer competencies. I'm not part of that group. Enough said. Okay, impact on scholarship. Basically, and again, remember, this wasn't just the ALI. This includes the assessment fairs and all of that. 33 faculty engaged in either conference presentations, publications, and our funded grants. Had 150 faculty, staff, and students give over 70 presentations at the 5 UNC assessment fairs so far. We still do them. As far as the fellows themselves go, we've had 1 publication, 2 manuscripts in work, 3 conference presentations, and as of today, 2 invited presentations. Used to be 1. Impact on the institution. A big one. Successful 10-year reaccreditation by our accrediting body. Recall back in 2007, that was part of the motivation for doing this. We were concerned. Well, it was successful, and they actually in the text did mention, not significantly, but they did mention how the ALI was a really good project and they liked it. 70 faculty from 25 programs were trained. The ALI, we believe, created a critical mass of faculty with assessment knowledge. There's also increased knowledge and awareness that led us to our current project, which we're working on now, of assessing the general education courses. And finally, the assessment is now used for scholarship, and it's more a part of the culture. I won't say that it's as embedded as we would like it to be, but it's significantly more than it used to be. So what are the lessons learned? What can we do to help you? And again, I thought of, whenever I was preparing this in my mind, I thought of that old expression about how you can always tell the pioneers. They're the ones with all the arrows sticking out of them. We were the pioneers on this to a certain extent. You probably noticed that the path we took to get here was not a straight line. We meandered all over the place, so I'm kind of hoping that these takeaways will help you avoid some of the meanders. Aspirational, as far as the fellows are concerned. We felt good about actually having an impact on UNC. And that's unusual for committee work, at least at our place. Usually committee work, you know, okay, I'll do it. But this, we actually felt like we were making a difference, so that made us feel good. We felt more a part of the campus, and I feel we grew professionally because, for one thing, we had to interact with all different parts of the campuses, all different levels. That was new for a lot of us. Some of the fellows reported paying a lot more attention to the student learning objectives in their own classes, because they say, oh, this is great. Oh, look at mine. Mine aren't that good. So it improved in that way. Several fellows received recognition and promotions, which I mentioned, and we're going to get some publications. We got 2 more in the works that I'm really hoping we can get out. Maybe one in December, one in February. That's the plan. Challenges. Unfortunately, all was not rosy. As far as the challenges go, the fellows, initially, we all came from different areas. We didn't even know each other, to be honest. We all had different levels of skill in the assessment realm. In my case, I was from the College of Business, or am from the College of Business, and we have AACSB accreditation, and that was my thing in the college. Thing is, they use a totally different vocabulary than the rest of the world. So my initial thought going in was, well, the rest of the world's wrong, right? I had to change my attitude, and also I had to work in both worlds simultaneously, which was just real fun. The same for some of the other areas. They didn't know the vocabulary, we didn't exactly know, so we had to learn together to get our skills up to an even level. That's where that 1 year helped us a lot. We had limited experience, at least me, I don't know about so much the others, but I had limited experience working collaboratively on a curriculum. I was used to being kind of a lone wolf. I did my thing, I presented it, etc. Well, this was a situation where we had to work with a bunch of people to make sure that it was seamless, so that was new. Also, getting and critiquing our peers was new, and it took a little while to get used to that. Similarly, teaching our peers was a bit of a challenge for some folks. In my case, we had the dean of my college was one of the participants, so there I'm giving a presentation to the dean. No pressure there. Balancing the assessment work with the teaching and scholarship. We were all faculty members. We still had to do preps, we still had to teach, we still had to do research. There were other committees. Granted, we did have a course release, but this was a lot of work. So it was a tricky balancing act. And finally, it was a little disappointing to a certain extent. Remember I told you 4 groups didn't finish? Some of the groups just weren't that interested in being a big proponent. And we learned to not expect 100% compliance. We wanted to get a critical mass, and critical mass is not 100%. So don't be disappointed if it's not 100%, because that's somewhat unrealistic, to be honest. Participants, aspirational. Most of the participants increased their knowledge, and you saw the statistics a minute ago. The participants also learned that assessment can be a manageable task, and that was just through the education. Once they knew what assessment was about, they knew it was for improvement, not to somehow damage them professionally, they actually started to take to it and actually use it. Basically, the teams had the same, remember I said how the fellows, we worked with people from around campus, the teams did the same thing. They were in the room in round tables very similar to this, and they would be sitting there and they'd hear another group of people who they'd probably never talked to before describe the exact problem they were having. So instantly you have some camaraderie, and also the notion that if they fixed it, maybe we can use the way they fixed it for us. So that was an advantage. The second year projects were quite viable, and we were actually using them in our internal program review, so that was good. The team projects, some of them gathered some, actually there's one team that got a grant, an external grant, which was really cool. Some others are doing research projects, so the notion of using this for a research project has caught on, and if you have any interest in that, this is a, I don't want to say wide open area, but there's not a whole lot out there, so it's something that you could probably get published. And finally, now afterwards, our programs within the university better align to the UNC UNC standards, and also the HLC standards. That's our accrediting body. So that's a positive. Yeah, you knew this slide was coming. Challenges. The participants, well, first off, they too came from different levels, right? They didn't have all the same level of knowledge and that sort of thing. And to a certain extent, it was worse for them because there were so many more of them. There's just 6 fellows. Well, there was 25 people in the room at a time so it was a much broader array of assessment levels. Also, the enthusiasm and participation of the teams was inconsistent. Some teams were great. They'd show up on time. They'd done their homework. They were raring to go. Other teams, most of the people were that way. And then there's a few teams, they basically checked their email the whole time. Those are the ones that dropped out. So the point being, it wasn't uniform enthusiasm, to say it one way. Similarly, even the teams that were very enthusiastic, some of them had problems getting their home departments enthused. Because from the home department standpoint, we delegated this to you. Why are you bringing it back to us? That's why you're the reps, so we don't have to mess with it. That's not the way this works. They are learning because it's easier to teach a small number of people. They, in turn, are required to go back and teach you. So that was a different thought process for some of the different programs. The mechanics of some of the workshops, to be honest, you get a room full of teachers and you teach to them. Very seldom are you going to have them all stand up and applaud. That was amazing, right? Turns out that some wanted more lecture and less workshop, some wanted more workshop and less lecture. A few complained that the coffee wasn't the right kind, right? So there were some things about that. And finally, and this is an important one, I was sort of making fun of the last one. This is an important one. The structure of the workshops kept people on task, right? Every month, it was pre-scheduled. Every month we had it. They had homework. They knew they had to get with their group to do it, so it was done. Once you finish the first year, it's kind of wide open spaces. And the normal human tendency is to say, we'll do it later. Yeah, the speaker this morning, we'll just put it off till later. There's no particular reason to worry. Well, later came sooner than they thought, and their projects weren't ready. So that was kind of a challenge. So what are our future plans? Well, first off, we have a whole new set of fellows with the exception of one. I'm no longer a fellow. But I got a plaque, it's on the wall. One of the fellows stayed on as a senior assessment fellow, and they got a whole new group. The whole new group are going to continue to treat it as a research project, and of course the old fellows are going to continue to wrap up our research projects. One of the things that the new group is doing is we are looking into giving a self-directed version of it, and I'm not sure offhand if we're going to do it as an online course kind of thing or just printed materials. I'm kind of leaning toward the online course because that way you can have some videos and that sort of thing. But we wanted to make it available to groups in the future that want to be able to take advantage, because obviously that will spread things further. Another thing we're doing is we meaning they, are doing some special topic workshops. One of the comments that the participants made in the first group was, this is really neat, but could you do something on, fill in the blank? Well, we're doing those now. We're coming up with some special purpose workshops for these groups, and they are handled in the more traditional professional development mechanisms where we just have the workshop and people that are interested show up. And finally, this new group is developing assessment for the general education realm, which is complicated. We don't have the kind of structure you have in Texas, so we're having to make a lot of it up ourselves, but that's the new task. So I will open it up for questions now. I'm going to be here in the next session, breakout session, because I believe my time is almost up. So if you have questions that don't fit now, we can do them later. Don't worry about that. Yeah.